unSILOed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.
Welcome to unSILOed. This is Greg LeBlanc, and I'm here today with Christina Maslach, who is emerita professor of psychology at UC Berkeley and is also, I think, the world's leading expert on burnout, and the author of a bunch of books. I have three of them with me. The most recent book is this one called The Burnout Challenge, co-authored with Michael Leiter. And you also co-authored this book with him. Gosh, this must have been 25 years ago.
It was
about
back in the 90s. So
that's right. And so this is a sequel, and then somewhere in between, there's this one, right? This one's called "Banishing Burnout: 6 Strategies for Improving Your Relationship with Work." Welcome, Christina.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, look, your work on burnout covers a lot of ground. It covers, it talks about the role of the individual and what the individual can do to address burnout that they might be experiencing. But I think more importantly and more impactfully, it talks about what companies and organizations can do to both identify and potentially prevent or remediate the burnout that their employees are experiencing. And I've had the opportunity to use your work quite a bit in my class on the workplace. And what I've discovered is that most people have a view of burnout that's quite simplistic, right? They think of it the same way the electricians would think about it. You've got a capacity, and you've got, and you've got stuff going through, and if the stuff going through is bigger than the capacity, then you get burnout. And so there's a lot of emphasis on just quantity of workload. But you highlight, and have been highlighting for years, that it's far more than that. It's not about the quantity of work. A lot of it is about the type of work and the type of the work environment. And you point to these 6 factors. And hope we'll dig into all 6. But first of all, where did burnout come from, right? I mean, you mentioned that the term began in the 1820s, but within the psychology literature, when did burnout become a subject of academic research?
Well, it's an interesting question because in the 70s, when I was first gathering data, and unexpectedly I hadn't heard of burnout before until my interviewees started telling me about it, answering my questions, but then saying, can I tell you some other things about what I'm doing in the workplace? And that's really how I stumbled across it. I couldn't get it published in academic journals. I could get an opportunity to present at a convention, let's say, but that took a while. And then people would come, they would schedule a talk on burnout Sunday morning at 8 o'clock. It was kind of like, the worst time in some sense. And yet the room would get filled with people saying, oh my gosh, I'm so glad someone's talking about it. And so it took a while before it could get published. And even when I had developed a psychometric measure under the mentorship of my colleague at Berkeley, Harrison Goff, who was the person who had developed and pioneered a lot of psychology assessments. And I had tons of data and all the stuff that he said you need to have if you're getting a good measure of what you're finding. And I couldn't get that published in journals either. So I don't think it was really until the maybe early 80s that it finally kind of broke in, and my article on the measure wasn't even published in an American journal. It was a journal in the UK that Carrie Cooper was the editor for, and Journal of Occupational Behavior, and it was published there. And then once that got published and other people started using the measure and there was industrial organizational psychology, got a little bit more interested in it, but it first was taking off in other countries, primarily in Western Europe, in Israel, in a number of other countries where people started doing research on this, and then gradually it got more recognized, I think, and the data that people were looking at was kind of like, it tells us something about what's going on here. So it was, 80s, 90s. like so the books that you were talking about. And then, of course, during the pandemic, that sort of blew it open in a sense that everybody started using the term to mean everything under the sun, kind of thing. So what had happened in 2019 was that the World Health Organization had reviewed all of those decades of research globally, because it had been the measure had been translated and people were doing research in different countries. And they reviewed all of that and came out with a statement in 2019, pre-officially pandemic, that indicated that it was a work, experience, or syndrome, as they call it, that was in response to chronic job stressors that have not been successfully managed. And it made it very clear, because everyone was saying, oh, it's a disease, right? Because the World Health Organization has a big compendium of diseases. And it said, no, it is something that can have health consequences, but it in itself is not a disease. It's not an illness. What's interesting is that the kind of thing you're talking about, that people sort of think about burnout and often use it, is as a disease, as somehow a weakness, an illness, a lack of competence or a resilience, or, you're not strong enough, you're not good enough, you're not keeping up enough. And so it's always being looked at by a lot of people, and then, as an individual problem. So the problem isn't the workplace, the problem is you. And that you just can't do it and keep up with it, and you better get yourself together, and you better get resilient and all that kind of thing, and you'll be fine. And if you're not fine, then you better leave, or we get rid of you, or something. And so, despite the fact that it has not been classified by the American Psychiatric Association as a clinical illness, it's often put in that box. Even though we can say, yeah, if people are responding to chronic job stressors that have not been well managed, after a while, they might get exhausted. They might get, insomnia. They might get depressed. They might get anxious. I mean, are there health consequences down the road? We know from stress and coping, yes, it is a stress response to stressors. So despite the World Health Organization saying that, I think we still have people thinking or talking or acting as though it is an individual health condition and a health problem. And so it gets lumped under all kind of mental illness things, or let's make well-being in the workplace, let's fix you, let's tell you, how to take care of yourself, and why don't you lose some weight and stop smoking, and all the rest of that kind of thing. And coping is not a bad thing, but it doesn't change the source of the problem, which are the chronic job stressors that have not been well managed. And there's two things I want to point out about that, which I think the World Health articulated well. Chronic job stressors. That means they're there all the time. They don't go away. You think you've dealt with something and you come back, I'm back, and here I am all over again dealing with this. What we know from decades of work on stress and coping is that people do not recover as well from chronic stressors as they do from occasional stressors, like, oh my gosh, we have a huge deadline, we've got to meet, all hands on deck, we've got to just, work, get it done, and then, okay, we recover, and you come back. The stress response is not a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing. Thank God we all have it as human creatures, because when there's challenges, when there's threats out there, our body, our mind, the whole thing goes into action to do whatever needs to be done. I mean, there's fight or flight, but, in these days, there's other things that, people have to do. But the point is, we are not built to be experiencing stress all the time. The body, the mind, everything has to recover and come back. You can't run a marathon and then just say, okay, here's another one, let me keep going on it. No, you have to kind of recover, get back strong, et cetera, everything is normal, and then you start off on your next thing. So the fact that it's chronic job stressors is an important thing. Second thing is that phrase that says that the stressors have not been successfully managed is an optimistic note there. They could be better managed. Managed by whom? By anybody. What can the individual do? Sure, but more importantly, What can the team do? What can colleagues? What can the manager? What can the organization do because they have more control over the stressors than the employees, what can they do to make those less prominent, don't happen so often, reduce the effect, help with things to allow people to recover from, responding to these stressors? There's a lot. So there's two parts to this: what's causing the problem and what are the effects of the problem. And by focusing mostly on the effects, you put the blame essentially, or let's put it this way: if you ask who is burning out, you're talking about the employees, and therefore you're getting a who answer. They've got to meditate, they've got to eat better, they need more sleep at night, etc. They've got to get more resilient. Whereas if you ask why are people burning out, then you're going to, what are the sources here? What are the kinds of things? What are the conditions? What is the climate? What is the people aren't living in a monastic cell. They're in a particular kind of environment doing a job. And what's going on that's leading them to get, as we say in burnout, not just the stress response of exhaustion, but you also develop this negative, hostile, cynical, take this job and shove it mentality, which means that you're not going to necessarily do as well or perform as well, or you're going to do the bare minimum, we find, rather than trying to do your very best, so the quality of performance goes down. And you're also then beginning to feel not negative, not just about the job, but about yourself. What's wrong with me? Why can't I take it? I shouldn't have gotten into this. This was the wrong choice. I should have, whatever, done some. So those are the three components of a full burnout response: the exhaustion of the stress response, the cynicism, the negative distancing from the job, and the negative self-assessment of my own effectiveness in this job. I'm a good person, but why am I doing this? This is getting crazy. So probably a longer answer than you wanted, but does that make sense?
Well, you use the term mismatch, and
yeah.
You also use this analogy of the canary in the coal mine, right? So when the canary dies because of carbon dioxide poisoning, we don't say that it's a defective canary, right? We need to fix the canary.
Get a stronger bird, more resilient.
Yeah.
yeah.
But to some extent,
or take a long weekend, canary.
We do say that, right? So I teach in a business school, and so my students, they're going to start off as a canary and then end up as the coal mine manager, right? And so part of what I try to teach them in my workplace classes is how to deal with situations that they don't have a lot of control over, but also understanding that they are going to acquire more and more control, and as they mature through their careers, and so they ultimately will be managing for other canaries, right? And so they need to sort of understand both, right? How to adapt to circumstances that are beyond their control, and then to control the circumstances to get the best out of their people. But I guess the big question I have is, if burnout renders an employee ineffective and unproductive, then why on earth would employers not want to minimize it? You said in the book towards the end, you said there's a potential conflict between productivity and kind of humanity in a way. But I think the bulk of your message is saying that there isn't a conflict, and that enlightened employers who are interested in maximizing productivity would take seriously the idea of creating a workplace that's not conducive to burnout. There may have been a point in time, right, if you think back to the days of slavery, where they had these sugar plantations. These were true burnout factories. Far worse than any .com startup, right? But they had an inexhaustible supply of cheap labor. And, if you think back to Marx with the Lumpenproletariat, right, there's just this reservoir of people who, work for free in this relatively unskilled labor. That's not the position of any employer today. It's mostly skilled labor. It's mostly the ideas economy, and labor is expensive. So why on earth would an employer be oblivious to the productivity losses that they experience with burnt out employees?
Yeah. Good question. And I don't really have a good answer, in some sense, to that. if you're thinking about, paying good money to get good people, you're investing in a resource that you think is really going to be helpful and do a good job. And why aren't you then making sure that they are going to thrive and grow and get even better at the workplace, rather than getting beaten down all the time by things that push them beyond the limits? And so, I mean, it's sort of analogous to a plant in a pot. If you don't give it good soil or enough water or sunshine, I don't care how much money you paid for that bulb or that plant, it's not going to grow. I mean, it needs the conditions under which it actually, can flourish. And so I think that if you're investing in people and don't want to lose them and want to make sure that they're doing well, you need to sort of be looking at and thinking, how can we get a better fit between what they're trying to accomplish and what we're asking of them, and the conditions under which we're supporting that and making it, really happen well. And I think often, if there's a view of labor as just this pool, this molten thing, you're not thinking of them as human beings like yourself, as a person who needs rest, who, has family and friends and, wants to have a decent life for the time that they're on this planet. And so I think that the emphasis in the past has been that there's nothing wrong with the jobs that we put out there. But, the people vary into how good they are at doing those jobs. And the jobs don't change. And so we say, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen, because, nothing wrong with a hot kitchen, but that's the problem. Well, you know what? You can ventilate the kitchen better. You can turn down the temperature. You can do different things. And if there was one lesson we learned from the pandemic, that the notion that the job is what it is bit the dust, because we had to do a lot of jobs differently. We hadn't planned on it, and sometimes it worked well, and sometimes it was a disaster. But you learn from both of those. How can people get these kind of things done and do it well? And I think that opened up the door to say, well, if we could improve the job and get it done in a different way, why can't we keep checking in and saying, basically, every year, every quarter, how can we improve things around here? How can we make it a little bit better around here? And what we're often talking about is what people doing work on physician burnout call pebbles in the shoe. It's not great, big, huge, multi-million-dollar things. It's the little, daily, chronic job stressors that are driving people crazy, that lead them to have to waste time doing other stuff rather than the real work, or, just sort of take away and make it difficult to do something that they would enjoy and would look forward to and want to be proud about. And so it's often that it's not the big sexy things in some way. It's often more the little stuff, but it's those chronic job stressors. And they could be better managed. There's lots of ways in which we can say, okay, this is the way we do this process X. Any way to streamline it? Any way to get rid of things we've always done because we've always done them? Couldn't we do it this way? How about we do intake over here in a different way? How about if we, put our heads together? I mean, we have to adapt. The world changes. The world always changes, and it will be different. The way we teach at Berkeley is different now than 50 years ago when I started. And it's not just because we have different kinds of technology. We have learned new things about how best people learn and under what circumstances and how to assess, what they've learned. So you keep having to adapt. And it's like, I think we say in the Burnout Challenge towards the end, we're talking about it as analogous to a checkup. Checkup is just saying, so how are things going? What's going well? Where are we doing fine? Don't mess with that, with anything new. Just let it go. Where are we running into some problems with things that are getting in the way and making it difficult for people to really do well and feel good about what they're doing? And how could we improve that? And let's keep at it. And here, let's consider different things, get people's input. When I ask people about pebbles in the shoe, the chronic stressors, nobody says, I haven't a clue. They usually have a list on maybe both hands, or both sets of fingers of things that could be done better. They may have some good ideas, they may have some not so good ideas, but at least let's figure out how we can get to a better place in terms of how we, as a workforce in this place, in this environment, can really, maximize the kind of stuff we do and feel successful and feel proud of that. And so the match that we talk about between the person and the job environment is, in a sense, a sort of a no-brainer of a concept, and we've been doing it for a long time, actually, if you think about it, in terms of the physical workplace. I mean, we redesigned chairs so that people don't get as much back problems and stuff. We've redesigned, computer stations so you don't blow out people's wrists, with carpal tunnel. Redesigned assembly lines. Think of ways in which the human body, given that it's built the way it is, and that's it, you've got to say, what's a better way to support them as they do their work? What we're adding in the book is to say, look at also the match between what makes people tick, so it's a more psychological, social, emotional kind of thing. What are the key things that make us work hard, feel good about what we're doing, help out the newbies on the site? What are all those things? Well, there are core needs, and that's what we discussed there, that all of us have through all of our lives. And they're needs that we have when we're at home with other people in our family and the community. But I'm saying, okay, they're also in the workplace. And those are to feel that you have some autonomy, appropriate control and discretion and say once you've been trained to do something. You want to have some belongingness, some sense of you're a valued part of a community and you can, contribute and you give to other people that kind of support. That you have a sense of competence that you feel good about and you can learn more and get better. That you have a social network, maybe I shouldn't use that term, a social community that are people that you can talk to and get advice from. And even when things go wrong, there's a safe harbor where you can, wow, that didn't go well with that client. How do I do it better next time? What would you do? That kind of thing. So that kind of community that's supportive, trustworthy. We want to feel we're treated fairly, that if we work hard and do a good job, we'll get the promotions, we'll get the corner office, whatever, the new opportunity. And we want to feel that we're doing something that's important and valuable. So there's a sense of, people also talk about it as purpose and feeling that we're doing right things and we're not doing unethical things or, failing to do the right thing, that kind of ethical bind. We don't want to be in that situation. And so those are the 6 that we've identified that are important to people. And when you make changes or you try and think of ways to improve it, paying attention to those, if there's a sense that people feel, what I often hear, that the work environment is hostile, it's bullying, it's aggressive, it's harassing, they're going to throw you under the bus, I'm not here to make friends, and people feel they're surrounded by people and they feel isolated, alone, don't know who to turn to when they, can I talk or, get a mentor, get, some advice. People say it's a toxic social workplace, not just a toxic, chemicals or other kind of thing. And so that the things that help improve those matches, so that what motivates us, what makes us want to be in there and work hard and do a good job and celebrate the fact that we've achieved things and gotten better and so forth, that will go a long way to preventing the rise of job burnout and hating the job, feeling bad about myself and just feeling like can't get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, so this is an extension of the whole idea of human factors from the physical to the psychological, right? And so,
absolutely,
going back to Frederick Taylor, they understood that, if you walk through what an employee has to do right, on the job site, moving around and so forth, that you can, make it more efficient. And so it seems so obvious, and yet I'm always having trouble understanding why we see this persist. And so there are a couple different theories. You offer up one, which is that these managers have a faulty kind of folk psychology of what makes people tick. And for me, this is hard to understand because after all, they're people. After all, they work in a workplace. So is it possible that the people who rise to the top are the ones that have thrived in a toxic environment? And so they think, hey, I did it. So, everything's fine. Or is it that they perhaps have an interest in, keeping this environment because they benefit from it in some way? Or is it simply that they're too busy and they don't take the time to ask questions? Because, I've worked in environments where I go for a decade without anybody ever asking me for any, input on, well, tell me what's going on. Like, what are your frictions and what are your pain points and how happy are you? And when I try to imagine, these are all good people, I think they're just super busy, and it just never even occurs to them that they should be kind of taking a temperature check. So what are the explanations for the persistence?
Well, there's lots of possibilities, and I don't think it's probably all of the above in some sense. I don't think there's a single easy answer to all of that. I think that in many cases, yes, there are lots of good intentions. People saying we want to take care of our people, we want it to be healthy, all of this kind of thing. But often what I'm also seeing is that they then will decide what to do without actually talking to the people who are going to have to live with that and carry that out. And so when I interview it's not collaborative at all. And it comes from sort of a, top-down sort of place like, you know what? We will take all that junk food out of the vending machines and put in healthy fruit and, all that kind of stuff. And when I talk to people, say, I tell you, that's really not the thing that is driving us crazy. That's not the chronic job stressor that is, they spend all this money on putting a volleyball court on the roof that nobody wanted or asked for and uses. But that money could have been spent on a whole bunch of other things that would have helped us, do the job. Sometimes it comes down to they don't have enough staff to do what they want. Or they say they can't afford it. Sorry, folks. This is the burnout mantra that I hear a lot still. Sorry, we're going to have to do more with less. That means there's going to be more clients for you. There's going to be more, even though we're getting more contracts, we can't afford it. So you're going to have to do more of this. You're going to have to do more of that. And never, when things are added, they're very bad at subtracting. What goes off the plate? If I'm now doing this, in addition, what can I leave aside or not pay attention to, or can we cancel that, or what happens? No, it's just doing more and more and more. And more with less is not a good, healthy environment for people who just have to be expected to step up and do more. And if it's not collaborative, there has been no effort for them to check and say, what do you think about that? Would that, how would that help in terms of, stress and getting the job done and so forth? One of the most demoralizing things that I get from people in my interviews is, I think I quoted at least one of them in the book, saying, it is so demoralizing. I'm an engineer. I've been trained to do, X, Y, and Z. And I never, ever, none of us ever get asked for our opinion on how we could improve things, or how we could actually do some other thing that would be, kind of exciting or interesting. We are simply told, okay, we're changing now. You're going to do this. You're going to do ABC. What? Why? No, just, hush up and do it. And what that does is taking away your sense of competence. It's taking away your sense of autonomy. It's taking away your sense that, that you're trustworthy enough to be consulted to ask for an opinion because you're the one doing that work. And so I might ask you, hey, any ideas on, is it going okay, or something we could do to sort of improve the situation here? They never get called in. And that demoralization, again, that's part of that core psychology that we are as human beings, is leading then people to say, I'm going to go somewhere else where I have a better experience actually doing the kind of work that I know I'm trained to do, and I know I'm good at it, but, I'm treated like I don't have a brain. And not even an opinion or even a pat on the back and saying, wow, that you saved that one, when somebody walked out of the room, good for you. I'm, glad you're here, and
Well,
had the sense to do that, or whatever it was.
yeah, I mean, appreciation and respect, that's particularly puzzling because it doesn't cost anything,
Yeah.
right? I mean, just
No,
send out a thank you
no.
note or something. But in my experience, when I approach a manager or a administrator, I guess in the case, because I'm at a university, with an insight or an idea, I mean, they'll tend to turn around and run the other way because I think for many of them, they see this as yet another thing for their to-do list, right? So they have these massive to-do lists and they feel like they don't have time to accomplish it. And so if you show up and say, hey, we ought to do this, or hey, we should change this, there's like, oh, geez, here comes somebody with another to-do list, another thing for my, go away from me. And, even if the advice is, hey, here's some advice on how to reduce your workload, it's like, no, I can't deal with that, right? So I think it could be that it kind of cascades, right? So if the managers themselves are feeling this overwork or this burnout, then it makes it difficult for them to appreciate the way in which they're imposing this on the people one level down.
Yeah, and I often think that middle managers are the ones who are really often at risk for burnout because they're getting it from at least two sides, from top and from bottom, and maybe even more sideways or something like that, and often caught. And so, but the same question or the same way we're thinking about the match applies to them as well. It applies to everybody. It applies to the people up in the C-suite, So when we wrote this book, The Burnout Challenge, we were really trying to distill all of the knowledge that we gained through the work, in the research, and put it into a language that is a common language for everybody, as opposed to thinking, well, these employees are these kind of people, and these others are there, and this applies, all that kind of thing. There's a thing in which it's a we situation, because the job and the people are coming together, and at times they're working well, and that's what you want, and at other times they are causing more stress, they are causing more illness, they are causing more absenteeism, turnover, all of these bad errors, mistakes, so low quality, and there has been decades and decades of research by many, many, many people on this general issue. And so it's not new. We've known a lot about this for a long, long time. But stress, if I can put it in a broad basket, is kind of the last thing that is often thought about as being important for the economic bottom line. In fact, it's actually much more important for that bottom line. And there's a book Jeff Pfeffer down at Stanford Business School wrote several years ago called Dying for a Paycheck. And he's one who's gathered all of this data, and pulled it together, economic, social, the stress, et cetera, and makes the case that no, the costs, the human costs, as well as the economic and then productivity costs, are huge. And you're not taking it into account, then you're missing out, in some sense, on an opportunity. But I think, with managers, I think they often are getting really badly squeezed on a lot of things. And so I understand the to-do list sort of thing. The question is, are we framing the issues, the important questions, in a way that we can actually begin to come up with some better solutions and answers? And going back to that sense of there's a kind of a match, a better fit, between people and their environment. They're in an environment that actually supports them doing the kind of thing that needs to get done, and they are bringing their best selves then to that job and making adjustments and changes so that they can do better. I mean, it's a both side rather than just one. And I think the other thing is that it has to shift from a me to a we, so that we can better understand how interdependent we all are on this sort of thing. so that if managers are having too much to do and not enough time to talk with their team and sort of figure out things that are going on, they're depriving themselves of actually some valuable input and feedback that might save them some time in work, because everybody would say, oh, please don't go here or here. Please, can we think about this and work on that, sort of thing. But there's a sense in which how can we get focused on a goal or a set of goals that would be, and we could call success. How do we know success when we see it? I mean, what would be happening if workers were healthy and engaged and resilient? What would the workplace look like? How would they be responding? Where are the things that are getting in the way, so to speak, from both person and job side? How can we get to a better place on that? And we've often found that sometimes those better solutions come ground up and they come by accident. We try something and said, oh, wait, we should do that regularly. I mean, that's actually better than what we were doing when we start our shift. So from now on, we kind of change how we, begin the day or begin our shift. And that doesn't require tons of money. It doesn't require upper management. It could be something that just sort of recognizes some kind of problems. But I really think managers can be in a hugely important, wonderful position with their employees to work on some of these things. And rather than somehow feeling, they're not paying attention, they don't really care. It's, you get a performance review. What does it tell you? Not much, so, if those other things aren't kind of generating the sort of successful talk, that would be, whoops.
So I want to go through all the different factors that contribute to burnout. And as I said, I think a lot of people think that it's just about the quantity of work. Now, look, you and I are academics. We work a lot. And I've been in jobs where I've worked, 12, 13 hours a day. I can teach for 9 hours straight. I worked in restaurants where we would work from dawn till dusk. And so, beyond the quantity of work, there's what happens in the workplace. And you talked about frictions. And I know that you cut your teeth studying healthcare professionals and people in the caring professions. And I'm now teaching doctors. And, their biggest complaints are that they're not doing the things that they love to do, right? They want to spend time with patients, and they're spending time entering data. And I know as an academic, like I can teach for forever, but when I have to deal with all the bureaucracy and stuff like that kind of drives me nuts.
Right. Well, a couple of points just to mention here is one is that people often assume that if they're exhausted and tired, and so forth, because of long hours and lots in a big load, they'll write and say, is that burnout? And I'll say, no. I mean, you're exhausted, but do you still like your job? Yeah, oh yeah, it's a great job kind of thing. And how do you feel about the work you're doing? Oh, I'm good at this. I said, you're not burned out. You are what we call overextended. And it's the exhaustion, and it's often a high workload and unable to get enough rest and recovery and stuff like that. But that's, what we call job burnout is when the other two things kick in as well. It's not just that you're highly stressed and, oh my gosh, kind of thing. There is more than that. That if you still love what you do and still feel good about what you're doing, and there's all these other things about the work that are positive, you'll be more willing to kind of cope with that and figure out how to deal with it and so forth. So it's just not another word for stress, and for me it's that negative, cynical response to the job that is really, in a sense, more the hallmark of burnout. That's really what makes it job burnout, as opposed to people use burnout for everything. Marriage burnout, student burnout, midlife crisis burnout, et cetera, et cetera. So the word gets used for a lot of other things as well. But anyway, I think that what we have often found is that it's not workload alone. in some cases, if it's workload, it's uncontrollable workload. So it's the lack of control, the lack of autonomy that you have. You can't decide what to do. You can't make changes if you think something's better. If something goes wrong, you just have to stick with it, and you don't have that input, not being asked for ideas about how this could happen better, etc. So it's the uncontrollable part that might be connected to workload, as opposed to just, I have a lot to do. But more importantly, what we're seeing is that if you're not getting positive feedback when you do something well, whatever that happens to be, it's not just salary and benefits. It's like, do people even notice that I've done something that really kind of saved the day, or was something special, or came up with something better? Do people care about the fact that I'm there? I was the one when the power got knocked out who got back over, to the site, and was the one person who kind of was able to shut everything down and save stuff. Did anybody ever say thank you for that? I mean, there's things where it's not that you want to be praised all the time, but when you do good stuff, periodically you want to hear some good stuff back, if that's been right. I remember talking to people about, when I was interviewing them, about good days and bad days, and they could tell me a lot of stuff about bad days, and I said, well, tell me about a good day, and there'd usually be a pause, and then it would be, well, nothing bad happened. So it's not the presence of
right.
good stuff, the presence of achievement, or wow, we solved that problem, or hey, we landed that that big contract, that was let's go celebrate. It was like, no screamers, nothing bad happened, etc. And that was as good as it got. So that's what I'm saying, having the positive in life periodically, that things go well, or people have fun, or they enjoy their company and get things done. I mean, so that it's not just unrelentingly a bad, stressful day. But we also find, as I mentioned before, that the quality of the interpersonal relationships, with colleagues, with your managers, bosses, with the people you supervise, with your clients, with whoever crosses your path on sort of regular ways, that is so important to people. That I can trust people, that they can trust me, that they'll have my back and I'll have theirs. I mean, we can work together. Even if we disagree, we'll figure out some solution that we can all move forward on. And there's that kind of respect and just enjoyment of each other's, company, being part of this team. So when that gets lost and people feel isolated and no one to turn to, and even if there's a designated, you can go in and speak to a colleague about your problems, people worry it's a public door to go in to speak to that person, and how do you know it's going to be confidential and treated fairly? And often when I've asked people if you could have something that you think would help in terms of dealing with burnout, often they will say somebody who is a mentor, somebody, a safe harbor, somebody I can go to, or some people that I can go to and talk to, and we work out problems, or I get advice, or they help me out, and I do the same for other people. It's reciprocal, and that kind of thing. And if I feel I can't ever trust anybody to say it could have been better, or I'm kind of stuck, or whatever, rather than saying, well, forget you, when you get better, let me know and we'll go out for a beer, but I'm not gonna do anything. That has been a real cause of, I could do this work somewhere else, but if people talk about my colleagues, they're like gold. They're like money in the bank. I mean, the paint is peeling off the walls and it's a long commute and so forth, but this group, this team this is really special, and we're working together. Fairness, I mean, a lot of the cynicism comes when people feel that no matter what it is, they are not being treated fairly. And there's discrimination, there's glass ceilings, the wrong people are getting rewarded, or always attracting the boss's attention and not the people who are actually doing the work and getting things done. there's a lot of ways in which that just eats away at people's experience of the workplace. And at some point, again, they're saying, surely there's something better somewhere, where I could do this kind of work and not have to deal with that. And then the values. We have seen case after case where people are in a job where they feel they are not doing the thing. They didn't go into medicine for this, for example, to do this kind of work. They're not with the patients. They're just having to bring in money, and that's not what they want. And they talk about, I can't take this anymore, or I can't speak up when I see something that might cause bad publicity, bad PR for the company, even though it's wrong and we shouldn't be doing this, and we failed and did this badly or something like that. And just saying, they talk about an erosion of my soul, and I can't do that. And in the book, The Burnout Challenge, for example, we talked about a doctor who worked as an emergency physician overseas, during a war, came back, got a nice job, and got to the point where she said, I can't get out of bed to go to this because I really just hate the experience there. I'm not working with the kind of patients that I know I can work with. And so she took a pay cut, she quit, she went to another hospital, but it was working with little kids, and she just said it was so much better for me, on my soul and my, well-being. This is why I wanted to be in medicine, and this job is much more fulfilling, clearly on the values side. It wasn't about the workload or any of that kind of stuff. It was, why am I doing this? And can I be doing the thing that I really care about and that I'm trained to do? And when other stuff gets in the way and makes it hard, then it's kind of like, I don't want to live this kind of life. I really want to have something better. So, that can lead to the turnover and the absenteeism, etc.
You can have a toxic workplace without toxic people, but
Right.
there are sometimes toxic people, and it seems like like one rotten apple can ruin the batch. It seems like one toxic person can kind of ruin the whole environment, and so I've always been puzzled by why it is that toxic people are tolerated, and it seems like the toxic people somehow their success depends on their ability to capture the attention of the senior management, if they're not the senior management, and to essentially protect themselves and shield themselves from any kind of criticism. Why is it that this kind of toxicity, whether it's personality or behavior, persists? Why aren't there kind of immune systems that will flush out the toxic people?
Yeah. Good question. I wish I had a good answer for you on that one. But, I can only speculate on some aspects of that. One is that some of those kind of toxic behaviors are actually what gets celebrated as, go ahead and be successful, and you're not here to make friends, and you just got to do me first, and whoever gets the most marbles wins, or toys or something. And there's a sense where it's very egocentric. It's not about working with others, helping others, getting along with others as part of your success. But the more important question of something is not just why that's sort of celebrated as a hustle culture, but why we don't have other kind of behaviors and systems in place that allow that people to stop it and say, hey, cut it out. That really isn't right, or shouldn't do that. We have that problem in schools with bullying. Everybody knows who the bullies are. But when they start bullying somebody, does everybody intervene and jump in and say, hey, wait a minute, stop, teasing that kid because he's whatever, And so what is it that stops people from actually jumping into that kind of situation, and so gives the bully, the other kind of person, that kind of power to keep going and not get, and not get the feedback. It would be better for the rest of us if you didn't do that kind of thing. We have to, we're interdependent in terms of work we do. We need you on the team. We want to be on the team, but, et cetera. So I think it's also maybe hard conversations. People haven't really get trained how to deal with that. I mean, and the fact that it just happens with kids at a young age as opposed to adults at an older age suggests that it's a socially challenging thing to have to do, and people may worry about what the consequences would be for themselves personally if they stepped up and said something. But I mean, it's and how can we encourage people to take a sort of more heroic, if I can say that word, position of stepping out and saying, look, nobody wants to get bullied, please, stop that. Because usually the bully is way outnumbered. So why can't, people suddenly get together and figure out a way to either talk to that person or bring in a manager to kind of say, this is really, how can we get to a better place? Do we need to have some kind of person come in and do some group activity with us to get us all on a better page, and same page, with each other, including the bully? Or is the bully, do people need to recognize that kind of person at some point is causing more problems than it's worth to keep him or her? And are they in the wrong place? Maybe they're just acting out because, they could be in a better position. I've seen that in other cases where people are in the wrong place and in the wrong job. It doesn't go to their strengths, and it makes them do things that they are not well prepared to do. And often a job change to something else. What are they really good at? They are great at design. Talking with customers, not so much, especially angry customers, not at all. So where can you get a better match and take advantage of what this person brings to what you need to have done, and have a different way and different people or a different system for handling the complaints that are coming in. So
I remember one of my first jobs was in a restaurant, and I was a busboy, and the maitre d' had an incredible capacity to monitor everything that was going on in the room, and so we knew exactly who was doing what. And when the waiters tried to shortchange the busboys, he said, "No, you can't do that.
Yeah.
I saw that he was doing half your job for you," and so forth. And it was only later, that I realized how exceptionally rare that was. That you would have a boss that invested so much time and energy making sure that the workplace was a fair one, and that there wasn't any kind of abuse going on, right?
Yeah. And that kind of feedback is worth more than just signs on the door saying, "Let's be fair," or "Let's whatever," grit. Or whatever is supposed to inspire people. Having someone who actually takes that responsibility, models it, and does it in a way that doesn't really make it worse, and but handles it in a way that's graceful enough to say, that's not the right thing that we need to do here. Let's, et cetera, and get that done. And people learn from that, because then you learn how to say something that may not be welcome in some way, but it might be important. You're pointing out something that is actually going wrong, or could be done better. And it's not because you're trying to criticize it and blame someone, but just say, could we do it in a better way? So is it safe enough to, express that? How to?
So one would think that mobility would solve a lot of the burnout problems, right? So if you're in a bad workplace, you just leave and go to another one. Mm-hmm. But I guess there's two problems with that. One is that people don't necessarily even understand why it is that they are experiencing what they're experiencing. And the other is, I think that people grow attached to their constituents. They grow attached to I'm thinking, if you're working in a hospital, you care a lot about your patients. And so you might really hate your employer. You might hate your boss. You might hate all the terrible work that they do. But if you were to leave, you would feel like you were abandoning your patients. If you're a teacher, you don't want to abandon your students, right? And so is there an extent to which one's subjective perception around mobility impacts the extent to which you experience burnout?
It could. We've often heard over the years, and it may change during different economic times, but people feeling, locked in. I mean, there's a sense that they're locked in because, the golden handshake kind of thing. They've got too much, equity in their retirement that, leaving would be costly. Or, they've got family nearby, or they have a spouse who works, and both of you having to move, or all of you having to move away, isn't really an option. So you'd have to find something more local. And what are the opportunities, for something like that? And I have worried at times about people who are experiencing burnout and cannot move, cannot leave for, those kinds of reasons. And what is it like to try and continue to do that work when your heart is no longer in it? You're not feeling like you're actually doing great stuff, and you're exhausted, and not, this whole part of your life is not going well. So trying to either figure out ways in which things could be improved or be better is one sort of option. Another one is to find some other kind of thing to do, where, in some sense, and leave the job. I don't think it's necessarily the first solution, but it could be in some cases. I mean, I've heard also of people who were working in a particular kind of industry and were having just a very difficult time, and then left and went to a competing, same industry but another organization. And it turned out the way that place was run and what they were doing was like, oh my God, yes, so much better, because, we really get to do in there, event planning, and this is the way it can be done, rather than being just constantly, cut down and made to feel like you're terrible and whatever. So, I mean, there's that old saying, jumping out of the frying pan into the fire, and but jumping out of a frying pan could be into another frying pan that's just as bad, as opposed to trying to understand what wasn't working well, and what would be better, as something that I need to find out about in terms of a different organization. So, if I work in this hospital or this clinic, there may be other clinics or hospitals that are the same or different in some important ways. If I'm working in this school system, what would be like if I was working in a different, how could I change that? The other thing sometimes is people have found ways in which, either on a temporary or might end up more permanently, finding ways to rotate into another kind of job within the organization. And I made reference to that just briefly before, where somebody was put in a job that, in this case, he really wasn't trained for, and didn't do well. And people saying, oh, well, you're going to have to fire him. But it's like, if we could find what he's good at and why we hired him in the first place, and put him in the place where he could actually do that kind of work, it turned out he became, everybody, oh my gosh, he's got to be the one that we have work on our project. And I've seen that in a number of caregiving professions, or what we call now first responders, where if they're having a really hard, difficult, kind of day, that they have a system of being able to rotate into a less stressful job for the day. So all I have to do is give out meds. I don't have to actually be working in patients or doing some of the, other stuff. And when somebody else needs that time, they do that. So we do a thing where we kind of give people little breaks, and we each participate in this system of saying when we're on, when we're off, and try to help all of us, recover from things that really took a lot of out of us, but still doing something that's helpful and useful in the organization. Or now we're working over in this other kind of program that meets with families when they're first coming in for surgery for the kid or something like that. Are there other kinds of things where people can use their skills in some way? And if we were seeing, for example, after the pandemic, teachers really had a tough time, having to teach children online and sort of I always say a lot of them got thrown into the deep end of the pool because they hadn't been trained in doing this, didn't have the right equipment, talk about no internet connections or faulty, whatever, and trying to do this and then being blamed kids didn't learn enough and, all that kind of thing. When I was talking to a colleague, from a publishing company, she was saying, we always have trouble in Silicon Valley trying to hire people because they always pay better, and all that kind of stuff. She said, now we have lines going out the door of people signing up for this latest job that we had. And I said, do you know what they used to do? And she said, a lot of them are teachers. And they have the writing and the reviewing and the, all kinds of other skills. It was like saying, I'm going to go here. Can I get into a different place where what I have, my talents, my abilities, et cetera, could be done differently. And I could have, I can't go back to that school anymore. So I worry about losing nurses, losing teachers. Yeah, quite on post-pandemic.
So do we have any evidence on trends? It would be great if that every employee took the Maslach burnout inventory and we had data going back to 1800. Yeah. But is there any evidence that burnout is on the rise? Setting aside maybe the pandemic, which was a bit of a blip, do we have any evidence that it's on the rise? And if it is on the rise, is it because of the nature of work is changing, or is it that our canaries are getting a little less resilient? There are a lot of folks that would argue that the stuff that happens outside of work is also contributing to the capacity for employees to deal with adversity in the workplace, right? And I know people in my generation are always saying things like, "Oh, these young people they don't have a work ethic. They don't know how to just power through, right? They get all upset, too easily and so forth." Is there evidence on either side that the workplaces are changing in terms of their what they demand of the employees, or is there evidence that simply our employees are changing in their sensitivity or their resiliency?
It's probably a lot of, on both sides and, all of the above or something like that. However, let me just say a few things. One, older people have said about the young ones coming in, oh my God, they're not like us, they're not as good, they can't work the way we did, etc., for centuries. That you see that everywhere in a lot of writing, and that there's been that complaint.
Yeah.
And, the students coming to the university today, they don't, da-da-da-da. So people can see generational differences, but that kind of thing saying, and they're not as good, they are not the same, they're not as strong, they're not as resilient, is not necessarily what's happening. They may be coming in with different life experiences, they may be coming in with different expectations, they grew up in a different generation than the older ones did, so there's a lot of things that could, say somehow they're not the same. But it's not necessarily that they don't want to work. I think the other thing that I would point out is that I think there have been some changes in the workplace, but even before I say that, let me say the other problem is that people use the term burnout to mean all kinds of things. It's becoming a word like stress, which after a while means nothing because people use it to be good stress and bad stress. Everything is stressful. What is not stressful except the kitchen sink?
Trauma.
Burnouts.
Trauma is another word that's kind of been watered down.
Yeah, same sort of thing. And burnout, people are, as I said, using it to mean an illness or a disease or a weakness kind of thing. And attaching it to all kinds of other issues like midlife crisis burnout, which is one of my favorite. Why add burnout to that? Was that not enough? But so what's happening today is a lot more being written about burnout. When people do surveys, and I'm not sure how they ask questions, they're getting a lot of people saying, yeah, I'm burned out. And I think you're just asking people for their own opinion, and they're using this term, and maybe that's capturing something about what they're doing. Are they all speaking the same language and using the term in the same way? I have no idea. So the some of the work that's been done by various people have led to the inflation because they have talked about any one of those three experiences, the cynicism or the exhaustion or the lack of professional efficacy, any one of those are symptoms. See, they're medicalizing it again, and that's burnout. Well, no, it's not. It's actually the three together is really the problem one. If you have one of those, you may or may not be heading in that direction, but it's not the same kind of issue. So there's that. But at the same time, I think that people have begun to realize and understand that workplaces can operate in a better way. That we have seen improvements that have taken place. We had the pandemic, which showed us, I mean, if for nothing else, for some industries, not all, but you could work from home and do the work as well as when you were in the office. So when they're now saying come back to the office full time, they're saying why? Because I mean, I'm taking transportation to get and commuting for which I have to pay. You're not, and I could be doing this at home. Or in some other place that is, some other kind of workspace. If I get there and nobody else is around because that's not the day they're coming back, then why am I here? So what is the point? And I think in a lot of cases, people have not been able to articulate what the values are of why we should be together or when we should be together. Some companies, I think, rather than saying, again, taking the individual approach, okay, you choose what 3 days you come in. Well, that's not a solution. That's a we solution. That's me, and we may not coincide. But other companies have been trying to say, let's take a look at the month, maybe rather than the week, and what are things that we need to do that really require all of us to be there. We're doing some job training. We are doing some kind of thing where all of us have to be planning for the next thing. We have to be, meeting new employees. I mean, whatever. There's a whole bunch of things. And we block out everybody's in those days, that week, etc. But on these kind of things, for what you're doing, you can be at home. Yeah, sure. Just make sure you're on time, etc. So I think there's been more of a recognition that it could be better. And in response to the hustle culture that's been going on for a while, more hours, more work, less time at home, people, I think, are realizing that they want to have a decent life with friends and family and the community as well as in the workplace. And why can't we get something where we're thriving and being healthy in that way? They're recognizing the costs of the high workload. And when you look at other surveys, which admittedly are being very vague about how they say burnout, but you take Gallup polls. They did one in the end of 2022 worldwide, global, and what they were reporting was that Gallup usually says 30% of the workforce is engaged, which always has struck me as kind of low. Really? What's happening to the other 70%? In 2022, they said globally 79 to 80% of the respondents said they were burned out. Or sorry. They didn't say they were burned out. Let's take it back. I'm confusing it with another one. That one, people said they were not engaged with work. 80%. Mm-hmm. So that means, even if some of them were burned out, a whole big other chunk of them were less than wonderful experiences at work. They were not engaged. Well, so the 30% had dropped to 20%. Yeah. So it's saying that more and more people are unhappy. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
do we have higher expectations?
It's I don't know, but all I'm saying is that what has been happening in these subsequent surveys that about how engaged are you, people have been reporting less and less engagement, which means they are not having a wonderful time in the workplace. And it could be any of the other profiles that we see, like the overextended, or people just feeling kind of, not effective or cynical, just disengaged, but not burned out. But, 80% saying they're not feeling engaged with the work that they do, at some level it says something is not going right here. Maybe a lot of things. Maybe it varies between different kind of stuff. And there may be other things going on with that. I mean, maybe people are feeling they're not getting paid enough to have, a decent wage to live, in the area where they work, or the commute issues, or the work conditions that are just kind of brutal. They do the 996 thing that you do in China, 6 days a week, 9 to 9. I mean, they're just saying, no, this is not good. So I think there probably are factors, of which the workplace has some, for sure, that leads people to say, I'd like something better than what I've got. Mm-hmm. And am I engaged with this work? No. And if I'm not engaged, what it means is, am I putting in my best effort? Am I showing up on time all the time? Am I coming up with good ideas? Am I proud of the work I'm doing? And they probably aren't, is my guess. But anyway, so I think there's a number of things that probably say, yeah, something in workplaces. I mean, you talked about earlier mentioning people having to do things that are, not the reason I was hired to work with patients, let's say. I have to do all this data entry. I have to spend time having to print out stuff, and the printer's never working, and I have to run down to another floor, and I'm, those are the pebbles in the shoe. Those are the things that are wasting your time. They're taking you away from what you do best and why you were there. And often we find that if managers or the bosses, CEOs, actually do more of that walk-around leadership kind of thing on the floor, so to speak, to see what's going on, it's like, oh, okay, we do need a new printer, or now they're understanding a little bit more why the requests are coming in that they're always turning down, saying we don't have the money, we can't do it, etc. And so I think there's something to be said for what either is happening or not happening well, in workplaces, that this is a part of it. To always blame people that if they're not doing well, it must be something about them, their life, their external circumstances, is still part of that thing which says nothing wrong here in the workplace. It's just more stuff out there which is causing the problem. And again, we're laying the burden on people to be the sole sources of change in some way. And what it comes across as, and this is a message loud and clear, people feel they are always being blamed. They are, and that's why they sometimes shut up and don't speak up. They worry about what is going to be a harmful effect on me. Even when you think about the connection between, jobs in the United States and health, there's always these different kind of contracts and stuff where we send individuals to hospitals when they get sick, or injured, or to therapists when they're having some mental problem. It's a whole thing that works together, saying it's the people. Here's the job. Nothing wrong here. Nothing can be changed there. But it's the people that somehow you constantly have to do something about in order to do the job. And I think people are beginning to realize the job has some responsibility to think about, how best we can get done what we want to do and be successful at that. It's a more complex problem. It's not a simple thing, but blaming the people is easier than actually saying, so what could we do a little differently around here? How could we make it better? And if we say on a regular basis, we just check in and say, so how is it going around here? And not by the company as a whole, but by different units and teams or whatever the meaningful groups are. And take a more optimistic thing like, yeah, there might be some little problems we could fix. We might be able to deal with this. It's sending a message, we care about you and making sure you can do the job well, and we get their opinion and feedback, and we try to get better. So rather than people saying, do I have to confess that I'm feeling burned out in order to get some accommodation or something like that? And I'm saying if we can reframe it to not who is burning out, but what's going on around here and how could we make it a little better? Because maybe next year is going to be different. And after the pandemic, we sure should have learned something about how we can make it better in some cases. But but that's taking the blame off of individual people and actually getting them on board to work together to sort of make it better for us here. What would actually help us out a little bit? And we do the first one.
The book Burnout
Yeah.
Challenge is aimed at employers. And so, whose job is it within the organization to keep an eye on these things? When I started teaching my course on the workplace, I remember I got a lot of skepticism from administrators saying, nobody's interested in HR, right? And, I think there's some merit to this idea that HR departments aren't well equipped to do this, that they're more or less just form fillers and so forth. Some companies have transformed their HR departments into people operations or employee experience. Some have created like chief culture officers, or I even did a program for chief happiness officers, right?
Yeah.
So whose job is it to kind of keep tabs on the kind of employee satisfaction and
well-being
side of things?
Yeah. Well, in some sense, I think it should be sort of at bottom. We're always should be concerned about the people in any environment. I mean, if people aren't learning in school, we should be looking at how do we change the school in ways that will actually encourage, all different kids to be able to, participate and begin to learn and be effective. But the way you framed it is interesting because, like a happiness officer or something like that. This happened when purpose started being used as a buzzword about, we got to get purpose, which is like values and, goals and stuff.
Oh, there are chief purpose officers. I've seen that.
Exactly. That was the answer. We'll get a person, a chief purpose officer, a single individual. We'll give them a nice place and pay them well. And they are going to make everybody else feel that they've got real purpose. And the people who are the employees are saying, and you spent the money on another administrator, rather than on anything that would help us, be more invested in purpose.
Right, chief belonging officers.
Right, yeah. So what I'm saying is it's using that same kind of model, but then often it's like, we're not seeing results. We don't see the dial. We don't see the needle moving. So now we won't have a diversity officer, or we won't have a purpose officer, or we won't have a, But who said that was the solution to that, whatever the issue was, that a single person would go around and somehow be responsible for and make the changes in other people's work experience. And in many cases, those people are going to be, when I interview them, they're, spending all that money doing this when, you could have taken that. I've got 10 things we could have changed in what we're doing here, and it wouldn't cost so much. And why can't we, spend it here and get it better, or get some of this stuff rid of? Why are we filling out, doing meaningless? My colleague Michael Leiter often talks about it as administrative nonsense. That people are doing stuff that is not, or physicians talking about it, it's not top of my license, it's bottom of my license. The administrative nonsense stuff. I mean, top of my license is working with patients in the way that I'm trained to do, and somehow. So the strategy, even with HR, I think it's still in general sort of built on working and focusing on individuals as individuals. And there's nothing wrong with that, except you need to take into account that a lot of the individuals in a particular unit share stuff, are interdependent. And there's something else, other things in terms of the social glue and the collaboration and the sense of teamwork and how you work together to get something done. You're not all alone by yourself in this things. And so there needs to be, with an HR focus, I think also more of that we perspective. What is it we share? What is it we have in common? What is it we have to do together? If we've got an atmosphere where people are just sort of gunning for each other and not helping each other out, people keep saying things like, I love my work, I think I'm good at it, but I wish I wasn't in this office. Could I just work from home, and not have to be with these other people who are snarky and uncivil and make your day miserable and, backbiting and all that kind of stuff. And that's the stuff you take home and you fret about it and you reminisce and, and ruminate and it just begins to infect, whatever kind of purpose, joy, satisfaction that you're getting by being in that kind of environment. And a tough part of this is not just that singling out other people as being the source of the problem, realizing how much all of us in a reciprocal environment are doing those things for others. Are we the ones who are being, really snarky, put down, and particularly if we're attacked, we will do that. So we're contributing to that rather than actually being the one who helps out the person who's struggling a bit and saying, wait a minute, we're all on this team. We've all got to make sure we do this right. And here's some advice, or, you might try X or Y, kind of thing. So.
Well, the workplace is increasingly important because it's the place where we spend most of our time. And so, with less time spent with family, less time spent with communities and churches, it's increasingly important that we have a healthy workplace. And so your work is something that's relevant not just to bosses, but also to employees from top to bottom. So the latest book is called The Burnout Challenge. There's also Banishing Burnout and The Truth About Burnout. Yeah. So I recommend all three. Check them out. Thanks so much, Christina, for joining me.
Okay, well, thank you. It's been really interesting. You've gotten great questions, and I hope I've done some justice to the answers.
You certainly have. We'll talk again soon.
Okay, great.
unSILOed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.